All right. Hi, Northridge Jazz Band. So today we have our special guest in our jazz chat. It's Jim Catalano. Everyone say hi to Jim. All right. I know Jim because I've been playing with Jim for quite a long time now. I think I joined Truth and Jazz in 2005. So we've been playing together for like almost 15 years now. He worked for Ludwig for a long, long time. So he has a lot of really great stories. And I'm going to share one of those stories with you right now. So I'm a big Weird Al fan. Jim knows this, and he knows Bermuda Schwartz, who is the drummer for Weird Al. And so I kept telling him for years, hey, if Bermuda ever needs like something delivered from Ludwig, I'll hand deliver it to him. So last summer, Jim comes up to me and says, hey, I've got 2 tickets to see Weird Al play with the Fort Wayne Orchestra. I happened to be on vacation on those dates, so I couldn't go. So Jim, can you just talk us through that night?
Well, of course, I've been friends with Bermuda Schwartz, the drummer for Weird Al, for probably 30 years. Okay, I mean, a long, long time. And actually, he's invited me every time Weird Al's been on any kind of tour. I've always been invited to go and hang out backstage. And I've done it on several occasions. And so that's why you were the first person I thought of when I knew that I was going to go see him. And you get there to the pre-sound check time. So you want to get there early before sound check starts. So we just got to hang out a little bit, and then they did sound check. I could stay for all of that. But the coolest part, Bermuda Schwartz invited us to have dinner in catering. Hey, people got to eat, okay? And so we're down, and it was like a big buffet line there for the crew and the musicians and stuff like that. And so we got our food, and we're, hanging out, and all of a sudden, Weird Al comes over, and he says, hey guys, good to see you. Thanks for coming tonight. And he sits down, and we literally had dinner for about 45 minutes or so, talking about stuff. We mostly talked politics, which was interesting, and he was a Pete Buttigieg fan. And so we were talking about Mayor Pete. And it was kind of a cool thing that we were doing.
It was the 1980s. I don't like the 1980s pop music at all, but I listened to 2 people. I listened to Michael Jackson and Weird Al. I have every Weird Al album ever. I am a huge nut. I've seen him like 4 times in concert. And I missed meeting him in person with, going into this concert with you. I was so upset. I was scrolling through your Facebook pictures. The first one was you with Bermuda, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've been listening to this guy since I was like 5 years old. And then I scroll through more, and you're like, oh, you got your picture taken with R2-D2, because they did a Star Wars thing. And then it gets to the point where you're pictured with Weird Al, and I just was I was very happy for you, but I was so upset at myself. I love it. Okay, so anyway, now on to what we really meant to talk about. The drummer's role in a jazz band, and how a drummer should play, how a drummer can play, and help facilitate stuff. So I always, I've told you guys that I think the drummer's role is to set up the band so that there's no question what should happen. So like, if there's a big hit coming up, the drummer's the first one to do it. There is a style change coming up. The drummer's letting you know like 2 bars ahead of time what's going to be happening. And Jim can tell you this too. Lots of times, like dynamics and other stuff like that, that's not written in your part, is it?
Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is, but many times it's not.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to know. That's why it's good to rehearse. And so you know where things are happening. But the drummer's number 1 role above everything else is listening. Listening. If the drummer can listen to the music around them, and then they know their role. I do have a good little story about that. Is I was playing actually with the Elkhart Symphony, and there was this piano player named Frank Mantooth that came to town. At the end of the concert, Frank Mantooth was getting his standing ovation, and I'm still sitting on the drums right in the front of the stage. And he looks down at me and he gives me the thumbs up. And he said to me, you knew rule number 1. And I looked back at him and I said, it's not about me. And he said, bingo, there you go. And that's a role that a drummer needs to know so much. Now, we know that, in rock and roll bands, and drummers are really big and stuff like that. But when you're accompanying an artist and playing with other musicians, many times it's not about you. It's a support role. But part of what you said, time is important, keeping time, but you do that in conjunction with the bass player. In fact, the bass player actually drives time. And then the drummer, connects with that bass player. So they're somewhat a tag team, but then the drummer always has to be conscious of, yes, the dynamics. Just like sometimes in our band rehearsals, listen to the dynamics of the band, because if you listen to me, you'll hear me getting soft. And then that's got to be a signal to the rest of the band that, hey, it's time to pull back. It's time to be playing soft. And then the drummer can set up the different styles that have to happen if we're going from swing into Latin. Many times you don't just go, directly da 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 da. You don't go straight into Latin. Many times it sets up, so you have a bar or two at the most that will get it positioned to go into the Latin. So when it finally falls into the Latin, everybody feels comfortable, and there it is. But another thing that I like to tell drummers is that so much of what is written on your music is not what you play. Because what's written on your music are the hits and different things for the rest of the band, so that you know what the rest of the band is doing rhythmically. And then your job is to set that up. So if the band is playing ba-da, so if this is beat one, ba-da-da-ba-ba, the drummer would be playing ba-da-ba-da-bo, ba-da-ba-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-da-bo. He would be doing the setup for that in order to have a strong offbeat.
Like I've talked about the bucket of fish fill going in.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know exactly what I'm talking about there.
There was a show, you'll see it on MeTV today, but it's the old Johnny Carson show. And he had a drummer named Ed Shaughnessy. But there was a theme song that went ba-da-ba-ba-da, ba-da-do-do-da, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-do-da, ba-da-do-ba. And so the drummer would set that up. And so that ba would be so much more effective because the drummer would lay it down first.
Yeah, the thing that I love about playing with a great drummer in a jazz band is if that person's doing their job right, then I don't have to think so much about, hey, when do I come in? Especially a brass player, if you're a brass player and you got those shots. The drummer should help you get there. And so it just makes, for a horn player, it makes it so much more fun to play because you have less stuff to worry about. You can just really just have fun playing the music.
Yeah, and what I found is that, even in playing in a big band, I tend to do similar setups and fills, in a particular song the same way almost every time. And I do that for a reason, because I feel the band gets used to hearing that. We've noticed that sometimes, if I can't make a gig, another drummer, although they might be great in their own right, doing their thing, they set up the band differently. The band plays differently because they're not used to that same setup the same way.
Yeah, a good example of that is, I know you love playing Sing, Sing, Sing. But when you come out of your big, long solo, I remember I used to always count those because it's 5 sets of 8 bars. I used to count every single one of them, but then I was like, no, Jim is playing the exact same fill every single time coming out of that. So I just stopped counting. And then when other drummers are playing with us, I'm like, okay, I have to go back to really counting.
We've even noticed one time, I don't know if you were in the band at this time, but one of my favorite drummers in the world is Butch Miles. Okay, Butch Miles was the drummer, of course, with the Count Basie band for a total of 16 or 17 years. And he actually got to sit in on Sing, Sing, Sing with Truth in Jazz.
Yeah.
And he played it very different. He actually played it more authentic. He played it more the way actual Gene Krupa originally did it with the Benny Goodman band. But even there, I'm standing off to the side watching, my drum idol play. But because the band was so used to my setup, the way I got out of it and set them up to go back into the song, everyone was a little bit unsure of what to do. Yet they had one of the most iconic jazz drummers of all time leading them.
Yeah, I was in that group. Actually, I got my picture taken with Butch that year. I went up to him afterwards, and I had one of my students with me. And so we're like, hey, we gotta get our picture taken with Butch Miles. Like, I have it on my computer right here. I could show it to you, but I don't want to search through all my pictures and waste that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did play stuff a little bit differently. Let's talk about some other stuff too. Let's talk about being a gigging drummer. So Jim, you play a lot. I tell my drummers a lot of times, you as the drummer have to be the first one there and the last one to leave.
Well, we got to set up and we got to be ready. And so it's sort of like, the stage, the drummer has to go down first, and then everything else sort of goes around it from there. But I like to get there about an hour in advance, so that when the what's called call time, when the band is supposed to be gathering on the stage, I should be totally done. And that's just the way I do it. And then the drummer generally is the last one to leave the stage. Also, by tearing your drums down and safely putting them back in cases and your hardware back in a hardware bag, that also shows respect for your instrument. And that's an important part also, because my drums that I have are very old, but they still look brand new, simply because I've taken such good care of them over the years.
And when it comes to whether or not someone wants to call you back to play again with them, when you do that, they're going to be like, oh yeah, remember that guy? We didn't have to worry a thing about that person. So they're more likely to give you a call probably because of that than, let's say, someone who could play like crazy good, but what if they showed up late? So let's say you're going to go to a gig for a jazz band one day, but then a gig at like a cocktail hour or something like that, for where people are going to be chatting and whatnot. What do you change about your setup for those two things?
Well, I have two different drum set setups, okay? My first drum set setup I have, which would be for the big band, and where I have to have some volume, then I'm going to be playing what's called my 20-inch bass drum kit with a 12-inch tom and a 14-inch floor tom. And I'm going to be using a ride cymbal and a crash cymbal, okay? And then, of course, I usually use 14-inch hi-hats because they need to be a little bit more dense, a little bit more cutting through, okay? So when I have let's say a combo gig where I'm playing with the Notre Dame Faculty Jazz Trio, there I use a little tiny drum set that I have. It has a very small bass drum, very small tom, because the drums are not as important now, but now I use two ride cymbals. I use a ride cymbal over on my right and an alternative ride on my left that has a different sound. So I want to make sure I have a low sound and maybe a middle to higher sound with this. I use no crash cymbal at all, because all of my cymbals are crashable if I needed to, but in combo drumming, the crash is kind of not really recommended. It's more about time, laying down time. And I also, when I do a combo gig, I use these a lot, okay? And drumsticks also make a big difference in the sound of your drums, but incredibly different sound in your cymbals. So I'll use what's called a 5A type of a stick when I'm playing with the big band, but when I'm playing with a combo group, I'll use even a smaller stick there to reduce the volume, but what it does is it also brings out a little bit more ping out of the cymbals. And I use 13-inch hi-hats when I'm playing with my combo groups.
Yeah, because I recently got a new cymbal setup just last year where I got some 14-inch hi-hats as well, and I've really liked them. Now, granted, what I play, I don't play lots of jazz or anything. I'm just a self-taught rock and roll sort of drummer doing pop stuff. I can do that. But
I've heard you play. You play great. I like how you play.
Well, thank you. But just having that different size hi-hat was a real game changer for my setup too. They were less bright, especially with how I record. So having a little darker sound on my hi-hats really helped cut down on the volume of that, so that my snare, especially my 2s and 4s, could come through a little bit stronger.
Now, I might be an old man, but remember, I got to grow up through the history of rock and roll.
Yeah.
Okay. And so actually, I have bigger drums with a bigger bass drum, more powerful bass drum, bigger toms. and then I have 15-inch hi-hats
Oh,
for my
geez.
rock and roll setup with a 20-inch ride cymbal, but then I use 2 crash cymbals for my rock and roll setup.
Mhm.
Now, you rarely see me in a rock and roll setup
Right.
or playing, but from time to time, I do have rock and roll gigs, but I play with this singer-songwriter guitar player named Butch Miles, where sometimes we'll have a gig that is a club that is a rock and roll gig. And so there I bring my bigger drums, and I'm putting out a lot more volume, a lot more energy is happening on the stage. So there, the chip is not as important as the surface that you're hitting on a hi-hat.
Yeah.
Where in my combo drumming, where I use the 13-inch hi-hats, the chip sound that the hi-hats get, that's everything. That's the most important thing that's happening.
That's really cool to hear. That wasn't the cool thing about this conversation, students, is I had a plan set up, and it has completely diverted from the plan, but it's turned out better than what I had planned, because I'm learning a lot too about just how to set up for a gig, that sort of thing. It's really, really cool. I'd like to talk to you about like different people you've met. You've met a lot of really, really cool people. As we were setting this up, I was like, oh, I might show them a video of William Kennedy from the Yellow Jackets. And Jim told me, oh yeah, I know William Kennedy. And I'm like, you're joking. So who would you say is that you think are great players, but also just great people? Because that always blows me away when the great players who have no reason to be super nice to a guy like me when I play with them.
Well, I'm a drummer, but remember, I'm also a vibraphone player. And so for me, the best vibraphone player in the world is a guy named Gary Burton. Okay, now he's retired now, but Gary Burton was that guy who was just so incredibly nice. But every time Gary Burton would call me on the phone, and we talked often, he would always ask me how my playing was going. So Jim, what kind of gigs are you doing now? Hey, have you worked on this tune? Have you learned this tune yet? He was always sort of coaching me along, which was really such a cool thing. I got to go to his very, very last concert 2 years ago in Chicago. And when I walked in during sound check, when I knew that I'd arrived was when he stopped sound check and said, hey, Jim, good to see you. And so I knew all the years of working with him, it really hit home that he stopped a sound check to acknowledge me. And so that was cool. But I would say, one of my favorite drummers of all is a guy named Jeff Hamilton, who's an Indiana guy, okay? He's from Richmond, Indiana, I believe. But he is one of my favorite drummers in the world, and it's simply because he is the most tasteful drummer that I've ever really heard. Yes, he uses brushes a lot, but just what he does is just so tasteful. And he's quite a technician too, but yet he makes it look easy. I've been really fortunate that I got to meet so many of the jazz greats and stuff. Like we talked about Ed Shaughnessy, and I was so fortunate that my parents encouraged me to take lessons, to get in the school band, to do it all the right way, to learn music the right way. And then I had great band directors all through, all through school, from junior high all the way through to high school. In fact, there's a famous a jazz oboe and soprano saxophone player named Paul McCandless that some people have heard of. He's won several different Downbeat awards. Well, his father was my high school band director.
Oh, cool.
And his mother was my junior high band director.
Wow, that's cool. That's really, really cool. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat with us. Obviously, like I said, this chat completely derailed from the plan I had, but I had a ton of fun talking to you, Jim, and I hope that the kids got to learn a whole lot about not just drums, but just music in general. So thank you so much for giving up your time.
Okay, very good. We'll see you, everybody. Thank you.
All right.